For thousands of years, humanity has been, well, utterly captivated by the dream of eternal life. You think about ancient myths,
Yeah.
powerful heroes like Gilgamesh, right? His whole quest for immortality was sparked by grief, by losing his friend Enkidu, or even the first emperor of China, Qi Shi Huang. Ironically, he died from mercury poisoning while he was actually looking for an elixir of life. These stories, these quests, they just echo through history. They remind us of this like universal desire we have to defy decay, to escape the inevitable. But what if? What if that ancient dream isn't just a fantasy anymore? Today, we're diving deep into the reversal of aging, immortality as a scientific possibility. You've given us some really fascinating sources, and our mission here is to unpack the science, the really cutting edge stuff that's starting to turn these old myths into, well, modern biological pursuits. It's kind of journey from alchemy to advanced therapeutics and maybe more real than you might think.
It really is a profound shift, isn't it? What's truly remarkable, I think, is how the whole pursuit of longevity has just completely transformed. We've really moved on from those mythic, often fantastical ideas, rooted in legend and guesswork, to a rigorous evidence-based scientific discipline. This new field is called geroscience. And it's fundamentally changing how we even think about what aging is. It's no longer seen as this unalterable fate like gravity or something you just have to accept. Instead, geroscience says, look, aging is actually a treatable biological process. It's governed by specific, identifiable molecular and cellular mechanisms. And this is just such a radical departure from traditional medicine. Think about it. Conventional medicine, it often feels a bit like playing whack-a-mole, right? You get heart disease, okay, doctors treat that. Then maybe years later, Alzheimer's pops up, so they treat that. Then kidney failure. Each age-related disease is sort of tackled individually, almost in isolation. Geroscience, though, it steps back and says, hold on a second. What if all these things, heart disease, cancer, diabetes, neurodegeneration, what if they aren't just isolated events? What if they're actually symptoms of a deeper underlying process, which is aging itself? So the goal isn't just patching up symptoms, it's targeting those fundamental processes that cause these problems in the first place. And crucially, the real objective here, it isn't some impractical, maybe even undesirable pursuit of true immortality.
Right.
It's about extending what we call health span. That's the period of life where you're free from chronic disease, you're vibrant, functional, enjoying things.
Yeah, that distinction feels really important. Lifespan versus health span. So, for you listening, our mission in this deep dive is really to pull out the most important nuggets of knowledge from these sources we've got. We want to help you understand not just what's happening in the labs and clinics, but, why it actually matters for our future, maybe even for your own health down the line. Get ready for some genuinely surprising moments, maybe some aha moments that could reframe how you think about aging altogether.
And look, we should be honest about how we got here. It's really important to acknowledge that this field, well, it's faced a lot of skepticism, and understandably so. For centuries, the whole anti-aging space was unfortunately kind of plagued by charlatans, quack treatments, unfulfilled promises, often preying on people's deepest fears. And that history, quite rightly, has made a lot of people wary. But modern geroscience is really working hard to overcome that legacy. How? By providing robust, reproducible, peer-reviewed data. It's making a very clear distinction between, the old speculative desire for eternal youth and the tangible, scientifically grounded goals of extending health span and delaying age-related diseases. This isn't snake oil anymore, it's serious science.
Okay, right. Let's unpack this then. Before we can even talk about reversing aging, we have to really get a handle on what aging is biologically at its core. Because, if it were just wrinkles and gray hair, maybe we could just invent a better dye or a miracle cream, right? But what our sources make really clear is that the clock isn't just ticking on the surface. We're talking about something profound, intricate, playing out deep inside every single cell in our bodies. So what exactly is that process?
You're absolutely right to cut through the surface stuff. Aging isn't simple. It's not one single cause or just a straightforward decline. It's incredibly complex, multifactorial. Decades of really meticulous research have moved us way beyond just looking at skin elasticity or hair color. We now understand it involves this whole cascade of interconnected biological mechanisms. It's like a symphony of processes that over time just start to falter. And to help us kind of navigate this complexity, modern theories of aging generally fall into two main buckets, two frameworks: the program theories and the damage or error theories. But it's really crucial to get this. Neither one is seen as fully satisfactory on its own. The reality of aging seems much more nuanced. It suggests this dynamic, really intricate interplay between the two. Think of them like different lenses, different ways of viewing the same incredibly complex biological event. So let's start with program theories. These basically propose that aging isn't just random. It's more like a continuation of a preset biological timetable, kind of like how growth and development and puberty follow a genetic script. It suggests aging is, in a way, a natural part of our life cycle, following some kind of genetic program. Now, within this framework, there are a few subtheories. First, there's programmed longevity. This idea posits that aging results from a sequential switching on and off of certain genes over our lives. Imagine like a complex genetic playlist. Some genes are active when we're young, then they quiet down, others become more prominent, and eventually this leads to age-associated deficits as these genetic signals change and maybe cellular maintenance gets deprioritized. It's almost like a self-destruct sequence, but a very, very slow, subtle one. Then you have the endocrine theory. This suggests that biological clocks act through hormones to control the pace of aging. You know how hormones drastically regulate growth spurts or the menstrual cycle? Well, studies confirm aging is hormonally regulated too, just maybe more subtly. A really key pathway here is the insulin IGF-1 signaling pathway, or ISIS. It's evolutionarily conserved, meaning we see versions of it way back in simple organisms. Think of the IST pathway like a central command system in our cells, kind of a master fuel gauge, sensing nutrient availability. When nutrients are plentiful, this pathway is highly active. It signals for growth, energy storage, rapid replication. Great for development, right? But paradoxically, chronic high activity seems to accelerate aging, maybe by increasing metabolic stress, reducing resources for repair. Conversely, dialing down its activity, maybe through diet, seems to promote longevity by shifting cells into a more protective, repair-focused mode. And finally, within this programmed idea, there's the immunological theory. This proposes that our immune system, our body's defense force, is kind of genetically programmed to decline over time. This decline, it's called immunosenescence, and it's well documented. It seems to peak around puberty and then steadily decrease. And this isn't just about catching more colds. A weaker immune system makes us more vulnerable to infections, sure, but also to cellular stress, impaired healing, and crucially, less able to clear out damaged or potentially cancerous cells. This contributes significantly to overall aging and disease risk. It's like your internal security system slowly losing effectiveness. Now, in stark contrast, you have the damage or error theories. These emphasize the cumulative damage that happens to us from, well, environmental insults, metabolic byproducts, just living, really, over time. These theories highlight how both internal processes and external stressors mess things up. Under this umbrella, you find the classic wear and tear theory. It's a simple analogy, right? Cells and tissues just wear out from repeated use, like car parts. Maybe a bit simplistic, but it captures that essence of cumulative damage. And there's a really influential free radical theory. Denham Harman proposed this back in the 50s. This theory says a major source of damage comes from free radicals, these highly reactive molecules with unpaired electrons. They're byproducts of normal metabolism, like exhaust fumes. And these rogue molecules can damage vital stuff like DNA, proteins, lipids. We call that oxidative stress. Now, our bodies have natural antioxidant defenses, sure. But over lifetime, the accumulated damage from these free radicals can overwhelm our repair systems, causing cells and organs to malfunction. There's also the cross-linking theory, proposed way back in 1942. This suggests that an accumulation of cross-linked proteins damages cells. Imagine proteins like individual strands of spaghetti. Cross-linking is like they get tangled, glued together, forming stick clumps. This happens when molecules like glucose react with proteins, making tissues less elastic, less functional. Think stiffening arteries, reduced skin elasticity. That's partly cross-linking. It slows down processes, impairs cell function. And finally, a more recent refined view, the somatic DNA damage theory. This focuses on the fact that DNA damage happens constantly in our cells. Our DNA is under constant assault, free radicals, UV light, toxins, even errors during normal replication. Our cells have amazing DNA repair mechanisms like a tireless molecular repair crew. But some damage inevitably gets missed. It accumulates over time. This leads to mutations, chromosome problems, and ultimately cellular dysfunction. This buildup of damaged genetic code is a huge contributor to aging and eventually cell death.
Wow, okay, that's a really thorough breakdown. And here's where it gets really interesting, right? What's so crucial to grasp is that these aren't just competing ideas sitting in isolation. They're interwoven. It's a complex web. It's not really one or the other, is it? Like you said, the oxidative stress from the free radical theory that can directly cause the DNA breaks in the somatic DNA damage theory. It really is like a cascading domino effect. One thing triggers another, which explains why a single magic bullet for aging is probably unlikely, but also why hitting multiple points might be so powerful.
Precisely. Your domino analogy is spot on. The complex reality is these theories are deeply interconnected. DNA damage, for example, which can come from oxidative stress or other sources, is a primary trigger for this critical process called cellular senescence. And this brings us to a hallmark of aging that's absolutely central to understand, because it sits right at the intersection of many of these theories, and it's a major target for intervention therapies now. So, cellular senescence. What is it? Basically, it's a state where a cell stops dividing permanently. It hits the brakes and enters stable, irreversible cell cycle arrest. It usually happens in response to significant stress or damage, like overwhelming DNA damage, or very commonly, telomere shortening. Think of telomeres like the plastic tips on your shoelaces, but for your chromosomes. They protect the ends. With each cell division, these telomeres naturally get a bit shorter, just because of how DNA replication works. When they reach a critically short length, the cell senses this as potentially dangerous DNA damage and stops dividing. It triggers senescence. It's a built-in safety mechanism. We call this replicative senescence. Now, here's the fascinating kind of paradoxical part. Senescence has a dual role. It's both a potent, beneficial defense mechanism and, ironically, a detrimental driver of age-related disease later on. On the one hand, it evolved as a powerful tumor suppressor. If a cell gets damaged in a way that could lead to cancer, senescence forces it into permanent arrest, preventing uncontrolled growth. That's crucial. It protects us. However, and this is the big however, the accumulation of these senescent cells over time, especially later in life, actually contributes to many age-related problems. These zombie cells, as some call them, not dead, but not working right and causing trouble, they're implicated in cancer, heart disease, neurodegeneration, arthritis, inflammatory diseases. The list goes on. And this dual nature is mostly mediated by something called the senescence-associated secretory phenotype, or SP. The SPA isn't just one molecule, it's a complex cocktail of secreted stuff, pro-inflammatory molecules, growth factors, enzymes. These are the chemical messages senescent cells send out to talk to their neighbors and the immune system. Now, initially the SEIP can be helpful. It can recruit immune cells to come and clear out the senescent cells, a cleanup signal. But the problem arises when the immune system gets overwhelmed or less efficient with age, which it does. Then a persistent S-P creates this chronic detrimental environment. This steady drip of inflammatory signals promotes chronic, low-grade inflammation throughout the body, leads to tissue dysfunction, and significantly hikes up disease risk. Understanding this, SASP isn't just academic, it's absolutely critical for developing targeted therapies. It suggests maybe we can quiet down these zombie cells, even if we don't kill them, and reduce a lot of age-related damage.
Wow. Okay. So we've really peeled back the layers here, understanding the what and why of aging, right down to these intricate cellular things, from wear and tear down to DNA damage and these paradoxical zombie cells. It's definitely a complex picture, but this isn't just theory, right? The really exciting part, the bit that's shifting how we see what's possible, is what scientists are now doing with this knowledge. Our sources are just full of these incredible interventions. It suggests the quest isn't for some mythical magic bullet, but maybe a whole arsenal of sophisticated tools. So let's get into those now. What can we actually do about aging?
Indeed. Yeah, the shift to viewing aging as treatable has really spurred development of a diverse range of potential therapies. And these strategies, they aren't focused on finding one fountain of youth drug. It's more about systematically targeting the various interconnected hallmarks of aging at multiple levels, a multi-pronged attack. The most promising approaches right now include cellular and epigenetic reprogramming, a whole range of pharmacological agents modulating key pathways, and various regenerative and senolytic therapies. Let's start with cellular and epigenetic reprogramming. This is pretty revolutionary stuff. It aims to essentially reset a cell's biological clock. The foundation here was Professor Shinya Yamanaka's Nobel Prize-winning work back in 2006. He discovered that just 4 specific genes, OCT4, SOX2, KLF4, and c-MYC, often called the Yamanaka factors, could basically hit a reset button on adult cells. They could turn them back into an embryonic-like pluripotent state. These are called induced pluripotent stem cells, or iPSCs. This was huge because it showed a cell's biological age, even its identity wasn't fixed. It could be reprogrammed. The youth information is still in there, just switched off. However, while full reprogramming was amazing, it's not really a viable anti-aging therapy for a whole person. Imagine turning all your liver cells back into generic embryonic cells. They'd lose their function, right? Plus, there's a significant risk of forming teratomas, these kinds of mixed tissue tumors. Definitely not what you want.
Right, that sounds pretty bad.
Exactly. So this challenge led researchers to a more nuanced strategy, partial epigenetic reprogramming. Pioneering work by scientists like Juan Carlos Espizo Belmonte, who's now at Altos Labs, showed cells could be partially reprogrammed. You briefly expose them to Yamanaka factors, or similar factors, just long enough to reset their epigenetic clock, those DNA methylation patterns that change with age without losing their specialized function or reverting completely. These partially reprogrammed cells seem more resilient, function more like young cells, but critically, they stay as, say, liver cells or skin cells. It's like gently turning back the internal age dial, not wiping the slate clean. And this area has attracted massive investment, which tells you something about its perceived potential. Companies like Altos Labs, backed by billions, are focusing on cellular rejuvenation specifically to reverse disease, injury, and the disabilities that come with aging. They've even started human clinical trials, targeting things like neurodegenerative diseases and immune aging. Other companies, like Clock.bio, are using cool tech like CRISPR screens and AI to find new genes or factors involved in rejuvenation, hoping maybe to repurpose existing drugs. The field is just exploding.
That is incredible. The idea you can literally reset a cell's age, even partially. Mind-blowing. And speaking of existing drugs, here's one you might already know, metformin, common diabetes drug, right? But it's making huge waves in anti-aging. It's widely used already. What's so special about it in this context?
Absolute metformin is a prime example of repurposing. It's an old, safe drug for type 2 diabetes, but it seems to have significant anti-aging effects by hitting multiple targets. It influences nutrient sensing, enhances DNA repair, reduces oxidative stress, dampens inflammation, all key hallmarks of aging we talked about.
Wow, so it does a lot.
It really does. And this broad impact led to this groundbreaking study, the Targeting Aging with Metformin TAMAT trial. This isn't small scale. It's a randomized placebo-controlled trial planning for 3,000 older people who, importantly, don't have diabetes but are at risk for age-related diseases. And the TAME trial's design is really clever, mostly because it's trying to navigate the regulatory hurdles. It aims to measure a cluster of multiple age-related diseases, things like heart attack, stroke, heart failure, most cancers, cognitive decline as a single primary outcome.
Ah, so they bundle them together.
Exactly. It's a direct response to the fact the FDA doesn't officially recognize aging itself as a disease, which we can talk more about later. By grouping these diseases, TAME hopes to show metformin can prevent or delay a collection of akinjits linked by aging. This could pave the way for a new class of gerotherapeutics drugs targeting aging itself. A positive result from TAME could be truly game-changing for how regulators view this whole field. Then there's rapamycin, another really interesting pharmacological agent. Originally found in soil on Easter Island, fun fact, it was developed as an immunosuppressant for organ transplants. But it gained huge attention for anti-aging because it inhibits the mTOR pathway, mechanistic target of rapamycin. mTOR is like a master switch for cell growth and metabolism. It senses nutrients, tells the cell whether to grow and store energy, or focus on maintenance and repair. By inhibiting mTOR, rapamycin basically mimics caloric restriction effects. It shifts cells away from growth towards maintenance, repair, and autophagy. Autophagy is like the cell's recycling system, clearing out damaged proteins and organelles, keeps things running smoothly. And rapamycin has shown really remarkable life-extending effects in yeast, worms, flies, mice, even dogs.
Dogs too. Wow.
Yeah. Now, its immunosuppressive side means caution is needed in humans, but researchers are exploring lower doses or intermittent dosing to try and get the benefits without the full side effects. It hits multiple pathways, so it's very promising.
And then these drugs, the ones often in the news for weight loss, they have a surprising impact on biological age, too. We're talking about GLP-1 agonists like Ozempic, semaglutide. They're already changing how we think about metabolic health, but now they're messing with our cellular clock.
Absolutely. The findings on GLP-1 agonists are quite striking. They really show how interconnected metabolic health and aging are. These drugs, Ozempic, Wegovy, used for type 2 diabetes and weight loss.
Yeah.
Recent trials have shown significant, kind of unexpected results on biological age. One randomized controlled trial with semaglutide, about 100 people. After just 32 weeks, less than a year, participants were on average 3.1 years biologically younger, according to epigenetic clocks.
3 years younger biologically in less than a year.
Yeah. And what's even more interesting is the biggest effects were seen in the inflammatory system and the brain. Those looked almost 5 years younger biologically.
That's amazing.
It is. And it wasn't just weight loss, though, that helped. The researchers think it's because the drug reduces harmful visceral fat and, crucially, significantly lowers that low-grade chronic inflammation. Both of those are major drivers of epigenetic aging and accelerate age-related diseases. It really highlights that obesity isn't just cosmetic or metabolic, it's a profound aging accelerator. So what's becoming really clear from all these different drugs, metformin, rapamycin, GLP-1s, is that the future of anti-aging probably isn't one single pill. It's likely a multi-pronged strategy. Aging is just too complex. We're probably looking at using combinations of therapies, maybe even tailored to an individual's aging profile. A bit like how modern oncology treats cancer, right? Attacking it from multiple angles, chemo, radiation, immunotherapy, different drugs hitting different hallmarks of aging, creating a synergistic effect that's hopefully much more powerful. And beyond these drugs, we also have these really exciting regenerative and senolytic therapies. These focus on restoring youthful cell functions and clearing out the bad actors that damage cells. This includes senolytics and xenomorphics. Remember those senescent zombie cells that accumulate and pump out the harmful SSP? Senolytics are drugs designed to selectively kill those senescent cells, induce apoptosis, program cell death, just in them. The idea is, by clearing them out, you reverse the bad effects of the SSP, reduce inflammation, help tissues function better, like a targeted cleanup crew. And a newer, maybe even more subtle approach is using xenomorphics. These drugs don't necessarily kill the senescent cells. Instead, they inhibit the harmful SSP. They basically mute the inflammatory messages those cells send out.
Ah, so they disarm them rather than destroy them.
Exactly. It's clever because it lets the senescent cell potentially keep its beneficial tumor-suppressing function. Remember why it became senescent in the first place, while reducing its negative impact on the neighborhood, a more nuanced way to manage them. And of course, stem cells. They're still a big part of the regenerative medicine picture. Here, the idea is harnessing stem cells to repair damaged tissues and organs, replacing old parts with new ones, basically. A key focus is on mesenchymal stem cells, or MSCs. They're multipotent, they can become bone, cartilage, fat cells, and they also have powerful immune-modulating effects. MSCs don't just replace cells, they secrete helpful factors like exosomes that act like little messengers. These messengers can promote tissue repair, reduce inflammation, protect existing cells from stress, create a more youthful environment. Clinical trials are ongoing for a whole range of conditions like frailty, joint problems. Some early results, like using a stem cell prep called Lomecel B for frailty, have shown modest improvements. It's still a very promising area for broad repair and rejuvenation, bolstering our own repair systems.
What's truly fascinating here, as you've laid out so well, is that the scientific community isn't really looking for one mythical fountain of youth. Instead, they're systematically, intelligently tackling these incredibly complex biological processes from multiple angles. Synergistically, it feels like a rigorous scientific effort that makes real progress seem not just tangible, but maybe even increasingly within reach. Okay, this all sounds incredible, truly. Like something out of, the most optimistic science fiction. But we know science is rarely a straight line. Real-world applications always hit bumps in the road. What are the big hurdles, the big realities we need to confront on this path to potentially extending healthy human life?
You're right to bring us back down to earth a bit. While the science is incredibly compelling, inspiring even, the field definitely faces significant challenges. Scientific, methodological, regulatory, financial. A sober, balanced look is essential to temper the excitement with reality and understand what's ahead. The core scientific challenge, honestly, is just the sheer, immense complexity of aging itself. As we talked about earlier, it's not one single flaw you can just switch off. It's this culmination of multiple interconnected failures across different biological systems. That makes finding a single magic bullet highly improbable. And it means even with all these promising interventions, fully understanding how they interact in the human body over decades. That's a monumental task. We're messing with a system evolved over millions of years. Nudging it gently without unintended consequences needs deep, deep understanding. Another big challenge, scientifically and methodologically, is the reliability of biomarkers we use to measure aging.
Right. How do you actually prove someone is biologically younger?
It's exactly. Telomeres, for instance, often called a biological clock.
Okay.
The idea was simple. Longer telomeres, younger cells, shorter, older. And while there's a general trend, older people tend to have shorter average telomeres. The relationship is actually pretty inconsistent. It doesn't really meet the strict criteria for a reliable, independent biomarker. Research shows some people with shorter telomeres live longer than those with longer ones. It's not a simple cause and effect. Plus, both very short and very long telomeres seem linked to increased disease risk. And even more recently, a study suggested telomere length might be largely set at birth and stay relatively stable, not just wear down continuously.
So it's not just a simple countdown timer then?
Not really. This conflicting evidence means telomere length alone probably isn't a reliable predictor. It's pushing researchers towards more dynamic, comprehensive markers, like those epigenetic clocks we mentioned. And then there's the huge translational challenge. This is a major barrier. Promising results in model organisms, yeast, worms, flies, especially mice, they just don't automatically translate to humans.
Right. What works in a mouse doesn't always work for us.
Exactly. These models are invaluable for basic biology, but the huge differences in lifespan, metabolism, genetics, overall complexity. A drug extending a mouse's life by 50% might do nothing in a human, or worse, be harmful. Many drugs that look fantastic in animals ultimately fail in human trials due to efficacy issues, safety problems, unforeseen complexities. Bridging that translational gap safely and effectively, especially for interventions meant to work over decades, that's incredibly difficult and extremely expensive.
Okay, so even if scientists find something amazing in a dish or a mouse, there are all these practical layers between discovery and actually getting it to people. Which brings up a critical question. If aging isn't officially considered a disease, how on earth do you get a drug approved for it? By bodies like the FDA. That seems like a massive bureaucratic mountain to climb.
It is. That's the primary regulatory roadblock, and it's a huge one. The fundamental issue is, right now, aging itself is not considered a disease by the FDA in the U.S. or similar bodies elsewhere. So a drug company can't just get approval for reversing aging or extending lifespan. That's not an approvable indication. Historically, approvals need a specific disease target: treat cancer, treat heart disease, treat diabetes. This forces researchers and companies into these really creative, ingenious trial designs, like the TAME trials cluster of age-related diseases we talked about.
Workaround strategy.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a clever workaround to get approval for a specific indication, a condition, or a collection of conditions.
Yeah.
It's associated with aging rather than aging itself. It's pragmatic, necessary right now, but it highlights the systemic challenge. Changing that fundamental regulatory view is slow, difficult work, but it's crucial for the future of these gerotherapeutics. And beyond regulation, the financial burden is just staggering. Another huge hurdle. Clinical trials for a drug that genuinely delays multiple age-related diseases. Well, they need to run for many, many years. Decades, potentially, to get statistically significant results in humans.
Decades. That's wow.
Yeah. And that timeline is simply unfeasible for most pharmaceutical companies. They operate under immense pressure for returns on investment within much shorter periods, maybe 7-10 years after discovery. The sheer cost and duration make these trials incredibly risky investments for traditional drug developers. Plus, for a drug to be financially viable for a big company, it usually needs to be patentable. Gives them exclusive rights to sell it for a while. And this creates a real disconnect because many of the most promising anti-aging candidates right now, like metformin, like rapamycin, are already off patent. Old drugs.
So no big profit incentive for the big players.
Pretty much. With no patent protection, there's little commercial incentive for large companies to sink the hundreds of millions, maybe billions, needed for the huge human trials to prove they work for aging. This lack of a clear profit motive means some of the most promising, potentially accessible therapies are struggling for funding. Researchers end up relying heavily on private foundations, government grants, maybe wealthy philanthropists passionate about longevity. It's not really a sustainable model for bringing these things to everyone.
So even if we manage to crack the biological code, navigate the regulatory maze, pay for it all, we then step into this whole new territory of questions. Profound questions, sometimes uncomfortable ones, about society, about us as individuals. What does a future with potentially much longer, healthier lives actually mean?
This is exactly where the conversation has to broaden out way beyond the lab, beyond the regulators. It gets into deep ethical, societal implications. And these aren't entirely new problems created by longevity science, really. They're more like existing societal tensions that would just become far more urgent, more visible, if radical life extension became possible. It forces us to confront really fundamental questions about what it means to be human. The most prominent ethical objection, the one you hear most often, is about justice and inequality. Given the likely immense cost of developing these technologies, it's highly probable, at least initially, they'd only be available to the ultra-wealthy.
Right, the rich get richer and live longer scenario.
Exactly. And that could create this unprecedented divide. Not just rich versus poor, but potentially, at some worry, between mortals and immortals, or at least those with vastly different health spans. This would absolutely exacerbate existing inequalities, creating maybe an unbridgeable gap, raising huge questions about whether that could ever be considered just. It's not just living longer, but living healthier, more productively, more fulfillingly for longer. But there is a powerful counter-argument. Some ethicists and proponents say, well, would it be ethical to deny a clear good, like extending healthy life, easing age-related suffering to some people, just because it can't yet be provided to all?
That's a tricky point.
It is. In this view, the ethical imperative isn't to stop the science. It's to work like hell to ensure the benefits, once proven safe and effective, are distributed as widely and justly as possible. This means we need parallel work in ethics, social policy, economics, right alongside the science, transforming it from an inevitability question into one of moral responsibility. The goal should be universal access, not universal denial.
Okay, But the immediate thought for so many people, myself included, when you talk about longer lives is, what about overpopulation?
Mm.
Wouldn't we just run out of space, run out of resources? If people started living much, much longer, that's often the first fear.
It's a very common, totally understandable concern, that tragedy of the commons fear. But actually, if you look closely at the demographics, the mathematical analysis, that concern, while intuitive, seems largely misplaced. The surprising truth is that fertility rates, not longevity, are the real driver of population increases.
Really. Fertility, not how long people live.
Yeah, think about it.
Hmm.
Even if we could completely eliminate death tomorrow, which we can't, that would cause a linear population increase, steady, predictable growth. But even a small increase in the fertility rate, that leads to exponential growth,
Yeah.
much faster, uncontrolled, unsustainable.
Okay, I see the difference.
Plus, there's this well-established inverse correlation. Generally, the highest population growth happens in countries with the shortest life expectancies and highest birth rates, often linked to poverty, lack of education, healthcare access. So efforts to genuinely address global population concerns probably need to focus on reducing inequality, empowering women, improving living standards. Those things naturally lower birth rates. Since life-extending tech would likely be adopted first in wealthy countries with already low fertility rates, often below replacement level, an overpopulation crisis driven purely by longevity seems unlikely. The real pressure on resources comes more from consumption patterns, not just lifespan. And beyond the societal stuff, we also have to grapple with the really profound psychological and philosophical dimensions of potentially indefinite life. Even if we solve the biology, these questions remain huge. What about the psychological burden of watching loved ones, friends, partners, children, grandchildren age and die over and over again across a vastly extended lifespan? Could that lead to emotional numbness, accumulated grief, a kind of unbearable loss we can't even imagine now? How would our psyche cope? And there's that perennial concern about terminal boredom. Would an indefinite life eventually just lose purpose? Meaning,
Would we run out of things to do?
maybe. Or would we find new challenges, new ways to learn, grow, adapt? And what about memory? Our brains have finite capacity. After a few hundred years, would we need to prune memories, erase them? Could that lead to a gradual loss of personal identity, connection to our past? Core questions about consciousness. Philosophically, some argue really powerfully that knowing we're mortal, that our time is finite, is essential to being human. They say death gives life meaning, urgency, fosters wisdom. Aging is about learning to live a finite life. Embracing that vulnerability makes life precious. But the counter-argument from many geroscience proponents is that the goal isn't forcing immortality on anyone. It's about making death more of an optional choice, giving future generations the freedom to choose longer, healthier, better lives if they want. Many see it as a moral obligation for us to enable that possibility. Expanding human potential, expanding freedom.
And if that's the case, then maybe the real challenge isn't to shy away from the science, but to use its incredible potential to really confront these existing ethical and societal questions head on. It's about proactively trying to design a future where these advances actually serve humanity, rather than just making existing divides worse or creating new crises we didn't foresee. It's a conversation we absolutely all need to be part of. We have covered a tremendous amount today, from ancient myths like Gilgamesh and Emperor Qin, right up to the absolute cutting edge of geroscience. It's just abundantly clear that this whole quest for longevity has undergone a profound, probably irreversible transformation. We've journeyed from that fantastical, almost desperate search for true immortality to this far more tangible, scientifically grounded, and I think profoundly ethical goal of extending health span, living more life and living it better.
Yeah, we've highlighted some truly remarkable advances. That revolutionary potential of partial epigenetic reprogramming, literally dialing back a cell's clock. The surprising repurposing of everyday drugs like metformin, newer compounds like GLP-1 agonists, the targeted elegance of senolytics, xenomorphics. These aren't just theories anymore. They're active research areas moving into human trials. And while that journey is incredibly promising, we also have to keep acknowledging the significant challenges ahead, the sheer scientific complexity of aging itself, the formidable regulatory hurdles like the FDA not calling aging a disease, and those profound ethical and societal questions about access, about meaning. They all demand our continuous thoughtful attention. These aren't side issues. They're integral to doing this responsibly. But if we connect all this, look at the bigger picture. The scientific evidence really does suggest that while true biological immortality, like never dying, that's still highly speculative. The reversal of aging at the cellular, the tissue level, that is becoming a plausible possibility, maybe within our lifetimes. The most realistic future probably isn't about escaping death entirely. It's about reclaiming life, living more of it in robust, good health, free from that burden of chronic age-related disease. It's really about extending health span, letting us be vibrant, engaged, contributing members of society for much, much longer.
So what does all this mean for you listening right now? Imagine a future where maybe the last third or even half of your life isn't defined by decline, by a growing list of pills, by losing independence, but by continued health, vitality, meaningful contribution. If death, or at least that debilitating decline towards it, became truly optional or at least substantially postponed, what kind of life would you choose to live? And maybe even more importantly, what responsibilities would come with that kind of unprecedented freedom? It's a question definitely worth exploring, a future worth imagining, and one we'll undoubtedly keep pondering as this science races forward.